Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome wherever you are. You're joining me here today in a brand new location on Heygo. We are in the town of Newark. And before you go, hang on a minute. Isn't Newark more kind of Ian Brazy's patch? Kind of East Midlands? Well, yes it is. But historically, it's known as the gateway to the north. So consequently, I'm claiming it as legitimate. The passageway from here up to the Trent, to the Humber, has historically represented, if you like, the dividing line between northern England and southern England. So I think on that basis, it's a kind of fair punt. So let's just give you a kind of start off. And hopefully you're going to enjoy it. I think it's a very sort of picturesque town. I've got a great kind of castle to show you. But let's kind of start off just over here by the interpretation board so we can see where we are. We're in Newark upon Trent. Trent, of course, being the river, third longest river in England. We've got the castle over here on my right hand side. We're going to look at the castle towards the end of the tour. We're going to have a look around to the waterways and so forth. And so we're on Castlegate here, and the place name Newark is kind of first attested to in the records of Eynsham Abbey in Oxfordshire, where it appears as Newarkshire in about 1054, 1057. So slightly before the Domesday Book, we've already got Ina, a castle for her birthday. So we've already got this kind of marked down before Doomsday. But we think the origins of the town are possibly Roman. And that becomes sort of clear because it's on the location of what's known as Foss Way, an important Roman route through central England. And it's in the intersection between the Foss Way, the Trent, the river of course, and the Great North Road. So strategically it makes a lot of sense. And we know that there's a charter here in the year 664 AD. And the town is mentioned as being granted to the Abbey of Peterborough by King Wulfhere of Mercia. So Mercia was the kingdom. This is a time, of course, when England hasn't come into being as a nation state. What you've got is you've got a series of kingdoms, tribal areas, if you like, of England. So Mercia, kind of the central area of England, and this was an important fort of Mercia. And we know there's an Anglo-Saxon cemetery in these parts, which was in use from the 5th to the early 7th centuries. So archaeological digs have kind of looked at that, and we know, again, it's on the edge of the river and close to the sort of Foss Way. Now, the area that we're working down to, just by the riverside here, has got a very interesting history. It's known as Cookstool Wharf. Thank you, Mine. Does anybody know what a cookstool is? I'll just give you a moment to have a think about what a cookstool might be. And I think Marlena, probably amongst us, is likely to have an idea. So it's spelled C-U-C-K-S-T-O-O-L. A cook stool. Yep, a cook stool. So if I give you an image, I suspect you will be somewhere. Christine's on it. We might otherwise call it a ducking stool. Indeed. Indeed. So the tradition of cookstools, this is Cookstool's Wharf, not just for witches, Laura, just hold that thought. They came to be associated later on, but not specifically initially. So the tradition begins in the Anglo-Saxon area, and it continues here up to 1801. So again, unfortunately, some of the castle is kind of going to maintenance, but if I just go into zoom here, you can see this area is still to this day. Get that to focus on you. Can we get a bit of focus? Hopefully when we do, you'll see that is there we are. To hold my camera still. That is Cookstool Wharf. Sorry if that's slightly better, isn't it? So Cookstool Wharf. And basically it was, as you say, a sort of punishment. And very much associated with ducking stools. Insofar as that it was about submersion in water. And it was a popular punishment for, yes, absolutely, for gossiping women, what they call scolds. But also for merchants who gave short measure. You might have heard the term of baker's dozen. So a baker's dozen is basically where loaves have to weigh an amount by law. Okay, and you get 12 loaves out of a dough, as you might say. 13 is a baker's dozen. What it means is you put stones or grit or some way of making it heavier. So consequently, you get to make 13 rather than 12. So I guess you make more profit, but you're doing it through kind of forgery, through dishonest means. Hence, a baker's dozen. So perverse baptism, absolutely. So consequently, that was also a punishment for them. But mostly it was women that were the victims of the ducking stools, the cooking stools. And it was really about public humiliation. Women were often stripped to the waist, to the baring of the breast, added kind of humiliation onto this kind of rather ghastly sort of censure. And it's the offence of scolding, backbiting, gossiping. You might have heard of the scold's bridle. Something I'm about to bring up an image of that. A scold's bridle was like a metal headpiece put on women that were found guilty of kind of gossiping. It was sort of seen as kind of idle chatter, wasn't it? But again, incredibly misogynistic. Always targeted towards women. Occasionally, it was kind of sexual offences like bearing illegitimate children or kind of prostitution. But for the most part, it was this idea of kind of shaming women for indulging in these kind of pastimes of gossiping. So cooking stool is known to be in use from about 1215 at this spot till 1801. And you might think it relates to the term cuckold, which is obviously about kind of sex relations, outside marriage. But actually, it's from an older Anglo-Saxon word to cack, which of course means to kind of defecate. So it's a defecation stool. So it's expected very much that during this process there'd be an evacuation. So it really gives you a sense of quite humiliating. This wasn't, of course, not to be missing out, if you like. We've brought a cackle, absolutely. We brought it right up to date, haven't we, with waterboarding. So we're still using forms of water torture. Keep them alive, but half kill them, half drown people. Very, very effective. And as I say, during that process, you can expect it to be very, very kind of messy indeed. So not a nice punishment, not a nice thing to do. Happened here. For those that missed it, I'll just put up that image a second time. So we're stood here at the Cookstool Wharf. So right here is the scene of these punishments. And of course, it's a woman in the chair and lots of people stood around for entertainment. So let's walk on. And let me just show you, because I think this is kind of useful interpretation board. We've got kind of Newark Castle here. And it's an image from the sort of 14th century, or the reproduction from the 14th century. If you drowned, you're innocent, yeah, and bad luck to you. So you can see here the castle, we've just seen the outside of the castle walls. We're going to explore that towards the end of the tour. You can see here the town wall's going to go right the way around. Mary Magdalene Church we're going to see a bit later on the tour. But you can see how it works with the Trent. That what you've got here is a castle that's sort of first built in about 1130 as a fortified palace. And, it's very much about protecting, if you like, the Trent, because the Trent is a fantastic waterway in terms of... Now, look at that light on the water there. Isn't that magnificent? I can't see so well, so just give me a thumbs up. Yeah, 1 second, Dawn, because I think that's going to work really nice, that silhouette. So is that working for you as a postcard? Yep. It's difficult sometimes because when I'm looking into the sun, I know it'll work really well as a postcard, but I can't actually see the definition. So yeah, I'll show you the text so you can take some little snaps and read that for your interest later on. So it's talking about being built by, sorry, it's hard, my gimbal moves. It's built by Alexander the Magnificent, who's the Bishop of Lincoln. There's a fortified palace. And you can see, we're going to talk about King John in a moment. And you see here about King Henry VIII and the Civil War, which we're also going to talk about. So hopefully you've got your snaps there. We can kind of walk along. So this is the River Trent. And the River Trent is a very, very important English river. It's the third longest of the English rivers. It's the only major river that flows to the north, which is kind of interesting. And the River Trent and its Devon tributary have played an important role in Newark's life for many centuries. I'm getting beautiful light over the water now. Again, I can't see so well, but lovely bit of public art here. The kingfisher and otters. We're going to see a little otter piece of public art a little bit later on, so your first sign of the otters. So before kind of highways, canals were in effect, thank you, Diane, were the highways and byways of England. That's how goods got moved around. Before kind of motorised transport, really, rivers were the only practical means to transport large and heavy goods over long distances. And rivers, of course, also provided access to the sea for international trade. So I'm just going to pause you there just for a minute and again just show you a second image so you can get a sense of the Trent. So if you look in at, if you expand on that image, what you can see is the Trent kind of right in the middle. We're sat underneath York. You'll see the Ouse flowing out to the Humber. So you see where the Ouse meets the Humber. Run your finger down and hopefully you can then see the Trent as well. So it basically connects the Ouse, the Humber, the North Sea, the Low Countries, Scandinavia in the Viking era, to the Midlands of England and to the West Coast. So it's incredibly kind of strategically well located. And Newark, the town here, was built at the kind of lowest fording point on the Trent, which was eventually kind of protected by the castle and then bridged. So it's natural it should become a centre for riverborne commerce. And so that's what we're kind of looking at here, obviously, is the infrastructure. The river itself, in effect, has been tamed to allow it to be navigable for trade and for the purposes of the kind of movement of goods. So the natural flow of the river at this point, how was that for a shot, is very much tamed, and you'll see the reasons for that when we get down a few more yards kind of downstream. But isn't it a beautiful spot? Yes, happy birthday again, Linda. It's so lovely to have you with us on such a lovely day here in England. So as I say, some lovely reflection shots. I know many of you are keen lovers of the reflection shot. So it's almost like a mill pond. So you're going to look at the castle later on, but let's walk on. So we're walking up towards the town locks, and of course the locks is about navigation. So coming into our view, we're going to see two sets of locks. The ones on the left are disused. The ones on the right-hand side are very much still in use. And of course, nowadays, the waterways are much more about leisure and holidays, as you might say, but they are rooted, of course, in the industrial heritage of this country. And the industrial heritage of this area was very much related to malting and brewing. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. If there's sort of don't know, we'll give you an idea of what malting is. But basically, you can't make beer without it, so it's an important thing. I was going to get a sip of water, but excuse me for a minute. But again, we're getting some lovely reflection. The sun is just behaving. We've got some really calm movement on the water. A real kind of nice, natural sort of shimmer. And it really is a lovely day to be by the waterside. And of course, so few people. I'm just always so fortunate. You schedule these tours and you don't know who's going to be around. And it's so quiet. Thank you, David. Little thumbs up there. So let's go and have a look at the kind of lock mechanism. So the first lock dates from 1772. Built by a chap called William Jessup, who may or may not be a relative of mine, because my granddad on my dad's side was a Jessup. So who knows? He could be a distant relative of mine. But the other side was built in 1808. Mine too, I think, Elizabeth. There's a lot to feel about water, isn't there? We I think, are drawn to water, aren't we? Living beside water. So locks, for those that kind of don't know or kind of just need a reminder, are basically a way of raising a boat. Obviously, you can't really make water move uphill. Gravity doesn't really allow you to do that. So consequently, what you can do is, in effect, create a dam. And between 2 points, you can then fill that dam with water or remove the water from it, thus raising or lowering the level. So you can see what there would have been at this end here is a pair of gates. There are an excellent pair of gates over here. So when we get to this other side, which is the water is a great deal higher. So consequently, it's a way of bringing the water up. And these were a very, very popular lock. In fact, this was the... so when they sort of first came in here in 1772, immediately became very well used. And this was the first lockkeeper's house here. It's looking a little bit tumble down now, but again, just a lovely sort of shape. But by the time these were extended, and bear in mind they were extended less than 30 years later, I mean, which really kind of shows you quite how much traffic was kind of going through here. The second lockkeeper's house, which is a good deal bigger, which is now this lovely cafe, was built here. Isn't that gorgeous? We just go backwards a little bit just so you can get a sense of that. Who wouldn't want to be a lockkeeper and live there? There's a chimney there puffing away a smoke. Isn't that beautiful? It's got such a lovely balance. As you know, I'm a kind of big fan of buildings, architecture. I love kind of thinking and talking about buildings and their kind of harmony. And if I just kind of step back a little bit onto this bridge, just look at that in its kind of setting, by the riverside. Isn't it? It just works beautifully, doesn't it? This, when we get it right, it amazes me what we're capable of in terms of the integration of the natural landscape and the built environment. And yet when we get it wrong, I stagger by how ghastly and how badly we get it wrong. And I guess that's the point of living in an old country. And I know many reflect, on the hours of kind of history, the years of history, the centuries we've got. But equally it means we've had a long, long time to get things wrong. And we don't always learn from getting things wrong. But thankfully in some places we've got it right. And I think this is just one of those places where you just look at it and you think, yep, this works beautifully. The birds song in the background as well, isn't that nice? So we're looking at a landscape of industrial heritage in this area. And this is obviously a blend then between... Thank you very much. This is... Oh, you're beautifully polite. You're so well brought up. So a castle in the background. Your mother is so proud. And we've got the channel of the water. I don't know if you heard that in the background, but it's live, and we always get a degree of interaction. So let's walk down, and we'll give you more of a sense, if you like, of this sort of industrial architecture around here. Yeah, I see you smiling. Yeah, well, you know, you reward rudeness with politeness. The ruder somebody gets to me, the more polite you are. It's disarming. Eventually, they run out of steam. It's kind of an oddity, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? You know, if you fight, it sounds good, fight fire with fire, but actually fight with water would seem to me a kind of far better way of kind of doing things. If you actually want to extinguish the flame, as you might say, fight it with water. So they'll very, very quickly kind of run out of interest energy. So we're just sort of popping through this back bit because you can't actually walk down the riverside. Kill me kindness, absolutely. I mean, Linda will know. She's a teacher. She'll know that when kids are having a bad day, the last thing you want to do is butt heads with kids. Because then what they do is, particularly with their mates, they're going to lose face, they're going to feel stupid. So consequently, they act up and they act up and they act up. And they haven't got the common sense then to kind of pull back and, you know, kind of go, do you know what, I can't win this battle. You know, I'm not going to, you know, win eloquence. So they do stupid things. So I think it's always nice. So anyway, let's forget about unruly children. So again, we're in a kind of warehousing area. So because obviously of the amount of merchant activity, all this area around here was like warehousing and particularly malting. Just pushing back, absolute Alison. Alison knows it, you know, and hopefully some of these kids will end up, you know, in the forces, as Alison did, where they'll get their edges knocked off and they'll become, you know, kind of productive and useful. Others may go down other paths, but as I say, at that age, let's not condemn them too much and hope that they can learn some manners, learn a bit of structure, a bit of discipline, could be through sport, through participation, whatever. So this is a malting building, by the way, and you'll see that it's kind of 5 stories high, and typically they had no windows. And the reason for that, obviously, they didn't want to let light in, but of course no one wants to live in a building without windows. So these days, the windows are kind of been put in sort of subsequently. But they do make quite magnificent buildings, don't they? I love the artwork there. Hello, Adrian. Hello, Helene. So this is Thorpe's warehouse. So as I say, what we've got around here is basically an absolute mass of converted, thank you, Julie, industrial buildings, many of which were involved in, as I say, the wharfing by the side of the river. Much loved in New Jersey. Oh, fantastic. I've never been, so I would have to take your... But Newark, New Jersey, I associate now with The Sopranos, which I love. So I'd very much like to go to Newark, New Jersey, just to go see the locations. What's on the ground, says Monique. Are you talking about this kind of stone? Pebbling. Tony. Yeah, bada boom. Bada bing. Please don't go, not a prime example. Okay, fantastic. So as you say, what we've got is an interlinking here of these beautiful... I mean, do you like this industrial... I mean, I really like it. It kind of really works for me. So 18th century and 19th century industrial buildings, I think, have actually got a really kind of interesting aesthetic. We've kind of tried to do sort of things kind of similarly, more in a kind of more contemporary base. They haven't kind of really worked. But there's something about these buildings that, having had this past purpose, you know, so you see here, yeah, I agree, the riverside. So development in this area forms part of a scheme for improving the riverside being promoted by the Newark and Sherwood District Council. So Sherwood, of course, Sherwood Forest. We're very near 20 miles from Nottingham here, so we're in Robin Hood country. And as you can see here, lovely plaques here. Look, the Nicholson Trent Works of Newark. So these quite literally kind of bolts, aren't they, holding together the buildings, you know, for kind of stability. But they're quite beautiful aesthetic all by themselves, aren't they? Do you like those? It just makes for kind of interesting and kind of very, very kind of localised. Yeah, you're liking those. So, as I say, I really like this area, and we're going to go see the medieval and castle, but I really wanted to kind of show you this industrial as well, because I think it's every bit as kind of valid and viable. This is kind of part of the history of this town, and it's kind of, you know, raison d'etre being its proximity to the river. Look at this old industrial beaming here on the side. I think it makes you a really interesting town trail, and I don't know why it's taken me so long to come over here, other than I'll say this, please don't take this as a criticism of anybody else, but Ian and I used to have, we still have got an agreement that Ian did the Midlands, I did the North. So I kind of left this one for Ian. But then new kind of rules, new things came in, and suddenly didn't matter. Anyway, so that's why I hadn't done it until now. These tracks, by the way, did anybody see my Chai Horses video yesterday for the dray carrying the beer barrels? I'll put it on YouTube. If you haven't had a look at it, have a look on YouTube. And basically, these tracks here, so forget about the tarmac in between, that's been filled in later. These were grippers for the drays. So the heavy horses, so if you looked and saw those horses, those beautifully dressed horses yesterday pulling on, this kind of looks like a ladder, yeah? This was to give them grip. So obviously they're pulling the drays, it's slippery, it's kind of wet, and so forth, and muddy. Thank you, Linda, lovely video. So that's what these were used for, to give them some, you know, some way of holding on, some grip, as you might say. So this is the old wharf, but it is now a place called Otter Wharf, which I think is just lovely. So let me just show you this. The bears will like this, I think, if Tariq, I'm sure. So we've got a pair of really lovely otters by an artist whose name is, let me just check, Judith Bluck. I'll just show you her name, so if you want to Google her and look her up. So Judith Bluck. I've never heard of her. But isn't it lovely? Isn't it absolutely delightful? I really like that. They've kind of really, I mean, they're such beautiful animals, aren't they, otters in the first place? So to me, it's just really kind of captured, and just their little expressions. They're kind of such unusual, and of course they're so rare, or they have been, in this country. Aren't they elegant, Alison? Yeah. I think you've got quite a few in your part of the world, you know, Alison. In Nidderdale, I think there's quite a few otter sanctuaries and places that otters have now kind of found that work nicely for them. Now, there's another thing, I think, is the wheel here? I think it is. Yeah, indeed. Nidderdale, by the way, we must go over there. It's a beautiful part of the world. So around here somewhere, it might be on the next one, is where there's a wheelwright. In your pond yesterday, Diane. Oh, isn't that wonderful? How amazing. In Florida. So, otters in Florida. Blimey, I bet an otter in Florida. Right, this is it. So this set of buildings here was a wheelwright. So a wright basically means somebody that makes things. So we're in the Duke of Wellington Yard, which kind of places us, doesn't it, you know, in the early part of the 19th century. And this circle here is part of the building of wheels. And basically what it was used for was to make the alignment of the spokes of the hub. So you imagine big cart wheels. So the major cars, you can see how big this is if I kind of come in close. If I sort of show you that, if I put my foot there, you'll see my foot is, you know, about a foot long, right? So if you get a sense now, when I move backwards, how big these cart wheels were. And basically what they would do is they'd lay the cart wheel down, and they can hammer it all in so everything's aligned. And then on the outer ring, where you can see the kind of paving there, basically you'd have the outer ring, which is obviously put on in sections, and then they would drop on the heated iron. And so this was to protect the sort of paving stones. And then the iron would shrink, and that would form fast around the wheel and be sort of tight and kind of solid. But it gives you an idea of the size of the wheels we're talking about in the kind of industrial sort of heartland. Before, obviously, we had big wagons and HGVs and all these kind of vehicles of kind of mass transit. You were doing it. So the heavy horses that we kind of saw in the video yesterday, or if you haven't had a look, do find my Facebook. Is wheelwright the origin of your last name? Great question, Laura. I mean, Wright is cart horse, absolutely, dray horse, whatever you call them, heavy horses, industrial horses, agricultural horses. Wright just means a worker. So, you know, you could be like a smith, like a goldsmith, as you might say. So a wright, it's one of the great problems of those who want to go into family history, and I suspect many of you will have had roots, you know, perhaps in Europe, or maybe over here in the UK, for those that are in North America. You'll find that you come very, very quickly to a grinding halt once you get to the census of 1841, going backwards, because surnames didn't really exist. There was such a small amount of kind of social mobility. People were born, grew up, married, worked, lived, stayed, and died in the same area. So consequently, you didn't really need surnames as such. You're much more likely within villages, and of course villages were the unit of, of settlement, as you might say, that if there is in every village a blacksmith, a wheelwright, a cartwright, all these, as in Peterson, yeah, you know, so basically, you know, you're much more likely to have your surname relating to your profession. So consequently, a wright from one village isn't any more or less likely to be related to a wright in another village. It's simply they're both being given the same name. So hopefully that makes sense. It's where surnames don't really come into any kind of prominence really until sort of 14th to 15th century. So again, we've got more of the warehousing around here. So Carter, Smith, Fletcher, they're all jobs. The funniest is what's it? Fuller. Does anybody know a Fuller? If you know a Fuller anywhere, and famously Simon Fuller, who's the manager of the Spice Girls, was one of them. A Fuller was basically somebody who collected and bought urine. Stale urine was used for getting urine, the ammonia in it, the uric acid was used for getting the grease out of fleeces. So quite literally, taking the piss was going along and nicking somebody's urine. It was placed outside houses, and it was bought by the Fullers. The Fullers were people who collected and bought urine. So if you know or relate to Fullers, that's what you did. So, that's where the frame taking the piss comes from. To be cheeky, he's actually taking somebody else's urine and selling it as if it's your own. So there's always a reason behind, of course, these phrases. And if you're ever interested, internet's brilliant, but get Brewer's Dictionary of Phrase and Fable. It's one of those wonderful things, books you can just pick up and just open at any time, and you'll be just absolutely delighted by what you can find with them. So running a bit behind, as ever, I'm talking too much. It does seem that it's an occupational hazard. So just over here again, some more of these sort of building supporters from JC, James Cartwright of 1870. So we're going across the bridge now towards Longston Bridge. I'll show you the weir now. So some more postcardy times. Mother's maiden name was Carl. Interesting. Well, Carl, of course, is a kind of Danish name. So if I look down at the bridge, isn't that pretty? Let's go. We are on a ramble, Fran. We are. That's what we are. We're Rambling Johnny. Rambling Johnny Heygo. That's what I should call myself, isn't it? It's like a bluesman, doesn't it? Rambling Johnny Heygo on the trail. So I do come out with some rubbish. I can only blame you lot. I don't start from the get. We're going to do some real serious history today. I'm going to really convey meaning. I'm going to understand. I'm going to talk about this and the other. And I come on here and I start talking about taking the piss and giving some blues. It's silly. But there you go. That's the impact that you have on me. You say, if you think what's the difference between live and pre-recorded, if it was pre-recorded, I'd get on with the job. As it is, what should take 45 minutes takes 90 in your company. But what fun we have. I love it. I take no responsibility. I'm only 53. I'll grow out of it. I'll look at the ducks. Yeah, you can't blame me. I'm only 53. Not but a child, absolutely. Age is the one thing I can certainly say I'll grow out of. Or youth, rather, should we say. Aren't they pretty? Not but a Ben, absolutely. I'm in the prime of my life. So if you come over here, Longstone Bridge, and this is Packhorse Bridge, you lot have loved Packhorse Bridges, haven't you? And so this is our first little walk on a Packhorse Bridge. So Packhorse bridges are just wide enough for a horse, and of course they were designed for carrying loads. So the walls are always fairly low, because obviously you have bags either side of your pack pony, so you don't want high walls. And basically that does the job. It allows the horse to cross over the waterway. And if we look around this side, what you can see now is the water side, the weir side, and the agitation that's created by the weir. And this is where the water mills were, the paper mills. So obviously what you're creating is turbulence to allow the water to go around. A lovely sky over there. There's a postcard. That could be, we might be in postcard of the week territory there if such a thing still exists. So isn't that pretty? But anyway, onwards and upwards, backwards, sideways, whatever which way we're going, we need to get on with it. Otherwise we'll be still here in the dark, which is entirely possible. But so let's walk on. So back up on the Trent. So I say the Trent is a river that was very much associated with malting. Do we know what malting is, by the way? Do you want a primer in malting? Thank you, Polly. So malting is very necessary in the germination of beer. Absolutely, Alison's right on it. And basically what you do is you get barley. Well, there's a whole different, you can rye and have all sorts of things. But generally speaking in this country, it's barley. And what you do with that barley is first you seep it. So you collect it up from the fields, obviously. So it's very much related to agricultural. So, of course, around here, very flat, very agricultural, Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire. Lots of really, really good arable farming. So loads of barley would come here to Newark, by river, of course, move it by the river, by barges. And you can see one of the industrial sets of buildings here. So this is All these are all malting buildings here that we're looking at. Let me just get that sign out of the way, so that's ugly. So the two archways you're looking at on the sort of bottom right-hand corner is the old boiler room. And if you go up to the top there, that chimney once went up somewhere in the region of 50 feet higher than it does today. And basically what you did was, you'll see, if I could come in, see between the two white stripes you might just be able to see, they are offices and residential and a kind of bunch of other elements kind of going on. So can you see the winch there? If I just go in. And so basically what you've got is you've got grain coming in from the water on the barges, on the boats, and it basically goes in, and what they call they do steepage. So they put the grain into water, into liquid. And of course what that does, it begins the process of germination. Because you're taking something that's been dried out and you're kind of rehydrating it. So then it begins to germinate. And in the process of germinating, the enzymes within the grain change. And the starches turn to sugar. Most notably, maltose, maltodextrin, and this is where the malt comes from. So you're basically turning starch into sugar. And then you stop that process by drying it, which is what the boiler's for. So you have basically, you would put it out onto floors, you'd rake it out into a thin layer, and basically got hot air coming up under the floor, which is drying it. Then, of course, it's bagged and it's sent off to the brewers. So that would then go to Burton-on-Trent and the other kind of major brewing centres in this area. So there's about 30-odd malters along this line. Thank you, Linda and Fran. It really was a kind of huge kind of industry. And we can see that there's very much still... So the grain, what grain, Mark? So, Mark, typically in this country it's barley. You can make it with rye. There's a whole bunch of things. Basically, any grain you can do it with. But to make English beer, we would use, and of course, Mark's from the northwest, so again, big brewing area. You would expect to use barley for English beers. But rye is the kind of second most common. You can use oats. There's a whole bunch of things you can use, but generally speaking, barley is the biggest one, and that was very widely kind of farmed. So as we walk along here, we're seeing now the barges, the kind of dredgers, and looking at kind of the towpath. And this here on our left-hand side, all boarded up right now, was the area. What are hops used for? So hops, Mark, are done after the fermentation process. They added their flavouring. So basically, you take a variety of hops and you blend those according to what you're trying to create, as you might say, in terms of flavour, in terms of fruitiness, sharpness, zestiness. They basically balance off and create flavours. So hops is a flavouring, whereas the malting is what's actually needed to create the initial sort of beer process, what is going to allow the creation of alcohol, of course. When we used to Vox Brewery could smell the sort of hops. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, these are very kind of potent smells, aren't they? And it's, what do you call him? Proust, isn't it? That talks, isn't it, about, we can encounter these smells of childhood. It immediately kind of takes us back. There's nothing, you think about all the senses. Smell is one of the most evocative of all of them. We'll try and be quiet down here, obviously, because there's fishermen in here. And it used to be a rumour that the Trent was named Trent from the French trente, meaning 30, because it's believed there's 30 species of fish in here. Now, whether that's still the case, it is still said to be exceedingly good. Are you having a good day there, sir? You're catching fish. So fishermen down this side have been seen for probably millennia. It is very part of parcel. So dare we ask, out of the 30, how many species would you think? 6 or 7 today. So it's still doing mighty well. So we'll leave you in peace there and hopefully a good catch, a good omen. But I'd say that it was once believed that there was 30 species. In fact, it looks like this fella here has got a catch. Well, just be quiet and just see. I think he has. Well, let's have a look. There we go. Catch of the day on Heygo. And it's still the #1 participation activity in the UK. So basically, this is dry docks. So around here was feed the bears, sorry. This is a dry dock. So a dock, of course, is when boats, the barge, are taken out of the water and the maintenance is done. So I can just try and get between the bars there. You can see this one is big enough for 4 barges. It was put in there in 1952. If I can move back a bit, you'll sort of see the size of it. So dry docks are very, very kind of important for the kind of maintenance. So obviously, there'll be some degree of modern tools, but essentially, this kind of schedule of maintenance is pretty ancient. It won't kind of change that much because obviously what we're looking at is, boat styles, these Dutch barges, that go right the way back to the early part of the kind of 19th century. So we can now see we're coming up the other side. So we looked at the older abandoned side of the Newark town lock, built in 1772. We're now on the active side, built in 1808. So you can see here there is quite actually a traffic light. And we can see, obviously, for those that say we're looking, let me just give you a shot down there. Look how lovely that's looking. Missing East End in the US. Well, I'm sure you can catch up on that. Isn't that a delightful sight? The sun nestling there. So again, you can see the crane head just in the kind of the distance on the kind of right-hand side for lifting heavy weights out of the water. Thorpe's warehouse where we were just a few minutes ago. It is lovely, isn't it? So we've now got, for those that kind of just not quite 100% on how locks work, basically, as you can see, you've got the water at one height here. You've got these gates which create a watertight bond. We come to the other side of the... well, of course, it is a place, isn't it, of canals. So this is, if you like, treating a river like a canal, really. So we've got the castle reflection there at the end. So we've got the water at a consistent height in one sort of channel here. And basically what happens is if a boat is coming in this direction, it needs to move from the height here to the height on the other side of those lock gates. So it will come into this area. Both gates will be locked. It is a beautiful day, yeah? And then consequently water will drain out. And when the water has drained out to a sufficient level, because obviously what happens is then the boat will gradually, very slowly go down, right? Then consequently, it will be at the same level as the river on the other side, and we'll get a really good sense of that just in one moment, just as we start looking up towards the castle. So we'll start talking about the castle in a minute. I know we're going to talk about the castle next, and King John. My famous kind of namesake, King John, because we are quite a bit behind time, so we need to get a bit of a lick on. But I'm enjoying it, so don't worry too much about it. So if I just sort of stand here, you can see a really graphic description of what locks do. So there is the water level here, and there it is here. So I would say that there is probably a drop. If we walk just across here one more time. So we'd go for poo sticks, wouldn't it? But it'd be cheating because there's a gate there. So again, just a lovely shot just down the channel there, the other end of the lock gates. Just turn round. And down we go. Yeah, they are mechanically operated. Yeah, you've got steam hydraulics running off this. Yeah, the locks are fascinating to operate. So I think as we're now looking, though, at the castle in reflection, it's time to talk about the castle. So, have we heard of King John? Do we know about King John? My kind of names. We've only had one King John, so there shouldn't be kind of too many. And famously, he's kind of Robin Hood, isn't he? He's the brother. Running me all that exactly right. We're on the right page. So Newark Castle was founded in the mid-12th century, and the charter kind of generally dates up to 1135. Thank you, Christine. Bang on with the dates. To Henry I's reign. So the Bishop of Lincoln grants the permission to build a castle. And he also builds a mint here as well. So initially the castle would have been of timber and then rebuilt in stone towards the end of the 12th century, the 1190s, just around the time King John came to the throne. Now, King John died here after a feast at this castle on the night of the 18th October in 1216. And it's some 800 years since one of England's most reviled monarchs, King John, died. And those that have been on my other tours, you've been to Knaresborough, you'll have heard about King John. He loved to hunt in Knaresborough Forest, didn't he? Remember that? But to his contemporaries, his obsession with kind of leisure pursuits at the expense of royal duties was just a minor irritation. It was one amongst many. In fact, many viewed him as a complete jerk. King John was the youngest son of King Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine. And he was born on the 24th of December, 1166, so 100 years after the conquest, making him the 7th king to rule Britain in that 100 years, since 1066. Now, he was the youngest of 5 brothers, so actually at birth, it seemed very unlikely that he was going to make it to the throne. However, 3 of his older brothers died young of illness and injury, and so immediately he becomes the second in line to the throne after his brother, King Richard the Lionheart. So we're going to cross over this bridge. We'll lose. So although John organised a kind of failed rebellion against his older brother, He's nonetheless crowned king after Richard was killed attempting to recapture Normandy. Thank you. So he was loathed by his contemporaries as cruel and cowardly. Now, many people kind of think of medieval Europe as a bit like the Game of Thrones, like anything goes, you can do what you like. But no, there was rules, particularly when it came to how you treated nobles. And King John broke these taboos. He didn't just kill, he was sadistic. He starved people to death. And not just enemy knights, but once a rival's wife and son. He managed to lose swathes of inherited territory in France, and then pushed up taxes to fund vain attempts to get them back, and in doing so alienated his subjects in England. He had a reputation for being a sexual predator with the wives and daughters of the nobles, along with the kind of arbitrary treatment of both allies and rivals. And he just angered the elite. Yes, he spent most of his time in England, Susan. That's an interesting question. Compared to Richard, who spent about 3 months of his reign in England, King John was here most of the time. He kind of annoyed Pope Innocent III so much, the pontiff excommunicated him, and he ordered that England's churches were closed. He was forced to sign the famous Magna Carta document, passing over the rights and powers to the English barons, which is kind of often seen as the first sort of official recognition of the quasi-democracy by a modern king. And the peace of the Magna Carta, though, didn't hold. And John was soon again at war with the barons, who offered the throne to a French prince, Louis. But while fighting, John became weak and sick. He'd been on a march fighting a war under a lot of strain. He was probably physically and emotionally exhausted, and of course the living conditions on a march can be primitive no matter who you are. It's tough, right? So he was travelling from Norfolk towards the Midlands, and he halted here at Newark, where a storm was raging. He crossed the River Trent, and in doing so in the flood he managed to lose the crown jewels. He was not having a good time. So he took refuge here in Newark Castle. Do go by, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. And he soon died. His chaotic and disastrous reign came to a heaving end on or near the toilet, or whatever served as toilet in Newark Castle in 1216. Never been found, absolutely, Alison, yeah. So the rumours put his demise down to eating unripe peaches, drinking too much sweet ale, or even being dosed with poison from a toad. By finishing John, dysentery, which is essentially diarrhoea, so violent it causes bleeding and death, may spectacularly change the course of English history. The chronicler Matthew Paris wrote, "Foul as it is, hell itself is made fouler by the presence of John." His epitaph reflects the contempt with which John was widely held, but it could also be a nod to his unpleasant demise. To say John died of overindulgence was a way of criticising his personality. It implies intemperance, gluttony, and imprudence. To say he was poisoned showed he was hated, and whatever the truth, those writing down the history had nothing good to say about John. And so, when John died here in the castle in October 1216, few mourned or even turned out to see his body being carried away to Worcester Cathedral, where he's buried. And after John's death, the kind of fire went out of the Civil War. We're going to see the inside of the castle a little bit later on, by the way. And Prince Louis was chased from England. Stability returned, and the Magna Carta took root. And the argument over the absolute power of kings had been settled, or so it seemed at the time. But this issue was to erupt again with deadly consequences some 4 centuries later. And once again, Newark Castle was at the heart of the action. But I'm just going to get us a little wiggle on now. We're going to try and sort of move forward. And you can see here in front of us the bridge over the Trent Bridge. It's not Trent Bridge in Nottingham. Constructed in 1775, the stone arches replaced an earlier wooden bridge. And it was opened up to allow wider craft to get through. So again, some lovely reflections, not silhouettes. The metal was added later, in the later part of the Victorian era, to accommodate the Victorian Midland Railway. And as we're going to go over, we're just going to walk over, I'll get you another couple of shots of the... isn't it lovely? It's such a nice town, this. And it's not a place that's kind of known. I wouldn't say, if you could probably pick up a... what's that guy, what's his name? The American guy? The Americans all follow? Or a kind of Foyets or whatever, Lonely Planet. You're not going to find Newark mentioned. Rick Steves, that's it, yeah. It's not somewhere that kind of pops up, and yet I think it's really great. I love it. It's a really kind of charming destination. I'd say, had it not been for the fact that it was on Ian's turf, I'd have brought you here ages ago. But, so we get a real shame about obviously the maintenance going on at the castle right now, but not much we can do about that. Hi, Patty. And we're going to talk a little bit later on about the siege here in the English Civil War, and the town motto very much comes from that. It is Deo Freitas Arumpe, which means put your trust in God and sally forth. And we can see it here on the crest. Deo Freitas Arumpe. It's Latin for put your trust in God and sally forth. So, do you know the timing of that? Do you notice? Yeah, beavers there. Otters again. How well we did that. Look at that. Isn't that a spot? Look at that. What a spot this is. It's so impressive, isn't it? You know? Absolutely gorgeous. And the bridge keepers are lovely. I don't know if any of you are members of Women's Institutes anywhere, but the Nottinghamshire Federation of Women Institutes have their HQ just here. Next door, they were originally the bridge keeper's house. So bridges initially were private, and you charge a toll to go across. And it's not this house, which is gorgeous, but a super cute little annex. There you go. How cute is that? The headquarters of the Nottinghamshire Women's Institute in the shadow, look, of Newark Castle. I'll try and get a right shot without getting run over. How's that for a place for your meetings? And sterling work, I'm sure, that they do. So this is a fantastic building that looks, of course, from the Tudor Elizabethan area. It's called Ossington Coffee House. But actually, it is Victorian pastiche. It is certainly not from that period. And it was built by a lady, Ossington, Countess Ossington, no less. Not big enough for us all, absolutely. And she was very much into temperance. And so this was built as a temperance hotel. I know a lot of you in North America will know all about temperance and kind of prohibition and so forth. And so this was built as a place where you could get a whole range of non-alcoholic drinks. Does Natalie? Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. But it's very ornate, very beautiful. I'll try and get this a bit closer. And so throughout its history, this was a place for travellers on the Trent to encourage the sailors, those working the cruise on the river, not to disembark and go and get loaded, but rather to come and have an alcohol-free drink, which is why it's here in the wharf area. So today it's a Zizi, an Italian restaurant. Isn't it glorious? But actually, in the Second World War, like a lot of buildings in this country, it was what called requisitioned. And whose airmen were placed inside it. And there's a lovely sundial there. Just look at again, I'm in the middle of the road, so I better move out. But just have a look at the detail there. It's absolutely beautiful. And consequently, airmen were put in here during the war. And some of them American, actually. There's a lot of air around here. And basically, airfields around here. And for their entertainment, a bar was put in. And as soon as the bar opened, it said a series of spectral activities started to happen. Things started flying off the wall, particularly the portraits of Lady Ossington, who was apparently so appalled at the thought of alcohol being for sale that she started haunting the place. So I think that's quite appropriate. If you're set up as a temperance hotel, why should it be? Is it for rent? Is it empty? It certainly was a Zizi. Oh, you're quite right. So landmark restaurant. It was Zizi. So what around here? This is the old castle wall. And again, we're into the kind of wharf area. And I need to get a tickle on because I'm sort of behind. But we're okay for another sort of half an hour or so. So I think we're going to run late. We're going to be more than an hour. But until you do these tours the first time, you never quite know how long it's going to kind of take. So again, no apologies. So again, this building here, the 5-storey one, this is a wharf building. And again, it's for malting. So the windows have been added subsequently in order to do that germination, that seeding, that warming, that drying. You wouldn't want natural daylight in it. It can basically disturb the chemical balance. It's much better done in kind of low light, as you might say. So consequently, that's what that was. So lots of these buildings around here have kind of got this industrial heritage and it's a really interesting mix. Is is Newark, because what you've got is some fab medieval buildings. We're going to see a few in just a few minutes. We've got some spectacular Georgian buildings. In fact, there's a couple just up here. I probably haven't got time, but nonetheless I'm going to make time. So if you haven't got time, make time. To show you, because there's a really nice blend of, these are kind of Georgian, kind of early Victorian industrial buildings, but there's some fabby-dabby buildings around here. We're going to Bargate, and there really is some fabulous buildings on offer. We have to do John's tour inside just to be sure. Yep. So let's go on to, I think it's that way. So Kirkgate's down here, yeah, next. There's such a lovely blend of Georgian buildings, of industrial buildings, of medieval buildings. It really is, encapsulated in a really kind of tidy little footprint. So I'll just very quickly just show you here two really fine Georgian buildings before we head down into the market square in the main town, look at some of the older buildings of the Civil War era. Bring us a new tour, John. It's fascinating. Do it at your own pace. Thank you, Mark. It's more about the light, really, just making sure that we've still got decent light. So a couple of really fab buildings. And again, the wealth of Newark, really, historically, is location. It's that corner between, the river and the road network. Hi, Jeff. So we've got beautiful, symmetrical Georgian architecture on this side, companion piece on this side. Population, Elizabeth, somebody look it up. In my head, I'm going to say 15 to 20,000. Again, it's something I should have checked and I apologise. Somebody have a look, but it's not huge, not by any stretch. It's just a very, very... John, we're going to see more of the castle, the inside of the castle, a bit later on. But let's walk down now towards seeing some of the medieval down in kind of Kirkgate. So there are very many older buildings here. And what's kind of nice about this place to say is not only are they kind of interspersed with more modern buildings, but a lot of them you have to look quite carefully because it's not immediately apparent they are older buildings. Like York, we're going to see the market square. The museum, if you're in the Millgarth, we've already gone past that. So we're walking towards the marketplace now, so don't worry about that. If there's another museum, if you're in the Civil War Museum, we'll be heading down in that direction as well. So again, I'm not quite sure which museum you mean. Oh, is it as big as that, Alex? I didn't realise. So we've got the castle, the Gilstrap Library on our right. So we're going to finish it. We're going to do a kind of route round and get back to the castle. But first we're going to go down Kirkgate and have a look at some of the older buildings around here. So yeah, let me just get a sip of water before we do. Again, some lovely, like almshouse type of structures. I'm not quite sure what their route is. So I do know that in the time of the poll tax, the population was just under 1,200, not including beggars or clergy. And it was in the sort of top 25 largest towns in the UK. So it's chances it's got a bit larger since. So at the beginning of the medieval period, England had lots and lots of what we call slow-growing sort of giant oaks. And that's what was used to build buildings. The traditional English building style that I know that you will all kind of know and recognise as medieval, typically black and white. You've seen many on my tours, down the south coast, in Sussex, Ian Braidesby's tours. We're going to see quite a few of those buildings. In fact, one's coming up on our kind of right-hand side. So they were built of old English oak. It was very strong, very slow-growing, and it was very readily available. So you could consequently build quite large buildings. What happens over time is the demand for warships and diminishing stocks mean that the common house brick becomes the norm. So this actually is the first of our kind of buildings of interest today. Insofar as it's a good example of the medieval frame has been covered over with brick and kind of restored. So it doesn't look like it's it's from that kind of period, but it's also a testament to the durability and craftsmanship that they are still standing up. So this is 18 Kirkgate, and there's a close-studded wooden shell behind there. So it's built for a wealthy owner. But obviously, the building on the corner coming into view now is a sort of more impressive version. And this is jettied on two sides, which shows it was very, very posh. So jettied is basically where the upper floor is bigger than the lower floor. And to do this, you have a rather very, very complicated structural design. And this is called a dragon beam. So if I look at You see this diagonal beam here? You don't normally get diagonal beams. So basically a diagonal beam means you've got joists running in two different directions. It's a very, very complicated piece of structure. Very expensive, consequently. So again, we know this was dated to 1337. These are houses of very, very wealthy individuals. Let me come back over here and you get a kind of sense of quite how lovely. And again, sadly, it's empty at the moment. But it really is beautiful. And the hall of these buildings was generally located on the ground floor. But in this building called Country Scene, it was on the upper floor. So it's kind of quite unusual to have upper living quarters. And so it's jetted on both sides, which it sticks out, making it larger upstairs and kind of downstairs with the sort of diagonal timber there. And of course, during the English Civil War period, this would be a place of billeting of the soldier. It's beautiful, isn't it, Polly? So let's kind of walk on, and I'll show you a couple more down here. So we are coming into a really kind of attractive, I think, part of the town, Mary Magdalene Church, we're going to look at in a moment. Well, it's just research, Linda. We'll look at the Charles I coffee shop in just a moment, but let me just show you one down here. If the signal holds up, because there's an absolute doozy of a building down here. Again, a coffee shop. And just so pretty, isn't it? I mean, this is real classic English kind of market town. We've got a lovely blue sky here. And so we'll go through... Oh, it's the next one. So we'll look at the coffee shop first, actually. So this is the Charles I coffee shop. And this, again, shows us... jetted buildings, different buildings that are overhanging. Yes, absolutely, that's the same in York, jetted buildings, yeah. But you'll see on this one, Dawn, it's just jetted on one side, whereas the other one freestanding jetted on two sides. Much, much more complicated to build. So thank you for my A+, I love that. So basically, the timber, as it becomes more expensive and scarce, you see here on the left-hand side, is nothing like as much timber on the right-hand side. Does that kind of make sense? So basically what you've got is a different level of investment. As time's gone by, this building built perhaps 20 years earlier than that one, and look at the difference in the timbering. So a really, really good illustration of suddenly this scarcity, this commodity that people just assumed was there forever. You built your houses from timber. Suddenly, it's not that simple. You need deeper and deeper pockets, and even if you can, you may be competing against people building warships. So what we start to see is different building materials coming in. So the emergence of the brick built, the kind of Tudor housing boom, is kind of part of that. But there's an absolutely lovely one down here. Let me just show you before we're going to have a look at the church. What's called box framing, of course, is that one. So you show a lot less kind of timber. But this one down here, if the signal holds, how wonky straight they are. I know, well, there's an interesting idea of that, kind of particularly going back to the medieval period, Rachel, where perfection was something that belonged to God. That to emulate perfection was to basically to laugh in the face of God in some respects. So you used the natural materials and you allowed God to create perfection. You allowed God to bless your buildings. It wasn't kind of seen as something that man attained perfection. So isn't this beautiful? I mean, look at this. You know, in terms of classic English stuck buildings, it is a lovely thought, isn't it, Rachel? I think it's very, very pious in nature. And it's a tea shop. Who wouldn't want to come for coffee and cake right here? The old bakery tea rooms in Newark-on-Trent in a 14th century. Look at that. Isn't that something? I'll give you another view from the side. The signal's okay actually down here. I thought it might be... Well, the signal tested earlier today, it wasn't great, but it's behaving itself. So what a town this is. Absolutely love it. A bookstore, yeah, lovely. Do come through, guys. So you got a bookstore, book-wise, taking on books. So for the book lovers... What a place. Vertical shot, yep. So close your eyes if you get to the motion sickness. Just go through there to get the vertical shot on request there. Look at that. Classic, beautiful, simplistic fairy tale England, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest. This is like something from a pantomime, from a fairy story. It is absolutely beautiful. And I think when you look at these buildings, I'm going to flick us back around. There's a part of it, if only for an instant, there's a part of us that wishes the Industrial Revolution never happened. Does that sound ridiculously romantic? Or do you get that little tug? Because that's what drives me. You know the kind of place I take you to. They've just got this inherent beauty. That there's a simplicity, an older life that we sort of took a sort of fork in the road, didn't we? We went for productivity and commerce and exploitation of the resources and maximising what we can do. But yes, absolutely. Alison, you want the modern, you want anesthetic and you know, being able to have surgery and all this. It's not that it's a practical desire, it's romantic. I completely get the romantics, with their kind of view that the Industrial Revolution was, a big step backwards. So Mary Magdalene Church. For some, a scarlet woman. For another, Jesus' most beloved, not a disciple, but certainly companion. Let's give a vertical shot there for the Kirk, and in Kirkgate, absolutely. So the church is the tallest structure in the town, and there's been a church here for 1,000 years. And the present one is in the Gothic style, with parts dating to the 12th century. It's one of the largest parish churches in England, and just spin it around, regarded as one of the finest as well. So the present church is a third on this side. So yeah, Kirk, as in Kirkgate, absolutely. And about 1180, the church was substantially rebuilt with a crypt that still exists. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, we're from Newark, yeah. Where are you from?
From York.
From York?
Yeah. There we go, gents. It's a beautiful doorway. I'll just give you a little elevation. Again, gorgeous sculpture and crafting around the doorway. The door's open, but we'll not go in. Obviously, it's Sunday, and we wouldn't want to get ourselves in the way of anybody who is in an act of worship. Hello, Aphrodite. What a lovely name you have. It's a beautiful carved oak doorway. And what we do have, as we go down to North Church Walk here, is some beautiful gardens. And there is a plaque here that tells us about the soldiers from the English Civil War, officers that were interred in the church and then removed in the 1830s to have a new burial ground in the centre of this park, these church gardens here. Because Newark, really, its story is not as busy as you ought to know, nothing like Mark, and not as big either. Newark is in many ways defined by the English Civil War. The English Civil War, of course, first one between 1642 and 1646. Newark, during that time, was under siege on 3 separate occasions. So I'm just going to show you within the gardens, which I think is lovely and pretty. So we're going to have a look at the spire in a moment. I'm just moving backwards because obviously on these you need to get a sort of bit of a distance in order to kind of capture. And then also, actually, before we go further back, let me just see if I can get enough zoom for you to see something. So can you see, if I go in, now look at that middle tower, the middle window rather, about the light. Can you see at the bottom, on the left-hand corner, a hole? This is one of a series of holes from the English Civil War where it's been peppered by gunshots. So the spire has never been properly repaired. It's lovely, just a bit of English history, as you might say, on show there. And we have over here, I'll just bring you to see, there's a kind of brass plaque which commemorates, I think, about 30 people that lay in this kind of burial pit here that were underneath the crypt of the church, but moved in the 1830s. And they were from here, from the English Civil War. So you can see there from the siege of Newark at the bottom, 1643 to 1646. So the English Civil War, for those that kind of don't know, is a kind of defining war in English history. It's a war of ideas, basically. And the idea in question was, should there be limitations on the sovereignty of a monarch? And as probably some of you will know, and many of you will know, hopefully you've been on my tours, when Henry VIII sort of divorced us from the Catholic Church in the 1530s, he created the Church of England, a Protestant church. But in order not to kind of annoy the Pope even more than he needed to, he didn't want to create a rival pontiff. So there's no religious head of the English church. What we've got is the monarch that is nominally chosen by God, which kind of makes sense. It avoids having a sort of second pope or some kind of pontiff. There is no sort of cardinal, as you might say, figure. What it did was it kind of left a fault line. And 100 years later, or so, just say 100 years later, his sort of distant relative, Charles I, who was then monarch, took chosen by God to mean that he was only answerable to God. And that particularly in the areas of tax and spend, he had nothing, basically, to be responsible towards any form of parliamentary control, any form of oversight. And he was a huge spendthrift. He spent vast sums of money, particularly on his wife, the French Queen Henrietta Maria, who spent, he lavished money upon her, sort of, masked balls and swans on the Thames and all that sort of stuff, Rubens' portraits, all that. So consequently, when they tried to clip his expenditure back, and he was having trouble taking postcards. Oh, I hope not. Let me just spin around and give you one more opportunity to get the East End there. Good. So in 1629, the king was running out of money, and he came to the Parliament and basically demanded more tax to be raised, and Parliament said no, or rather they said it needs to be conditional on you agreeing to certain behaviours, and one of these was agreeing with us a year in advance what these areas of expenditure were going to be. And he flat out refused. And so they reached a stalemate very, very quickly. And so he prorogued Parliament for 11 years. We had an absolute dictator in this country, under King Charles I. He was a tyrant. And when he eventually ran out of money, all sources of money and credits is the museum, the Civil War Museum. It's a big centre for national Civil War history. It's here. Just going to show you the front of this building here. In case somebody asks about the museum, I think this is the one you were talking about here. It's the National Civil War Museum, so commemorating and educating about the English Civil War. And so the Parliament of 1640, which came known as the Long Parliament, came together, as far as Charles was concerned, to basically approve a new round of spending for him. But actually, when they came together, what he actually was presented with was a list of charges. John Pym, the Speaker, who was the initial leader, of course, Oliver Cromwell became known as the leader of the forces of the parliamentarians, but John Pym, the parliamentary Speaker, was the man that pulled together. Very brave. At the end of the day, he could have lost his head for this. But he was presented with 200 charges of tyranny. And Charles's view was, well, I'm just answerable. I'm not accountable to you. So basically, you can do what you want with your charges. I don't care. And so there was no grey area. We descended very quickly into warfare. So we can see over here, very early Civil War cannon. I'll try and get through there so you can get a shot. So it was really the first time on English soil that we had battles that were using muskets, cannons, mortars. So it was the first really kind of damaging war. And of course, it was the first time that an England that essentially hadn't really moved on from the medieval period insofar as its fortifications were all based on stone buildings, came across the impact of what happens when you pound stone walls with cannonade. And of course, it becomes very, very dangerous. It's just as dangerous for the defenders of the wall falling on you as it is for the actual damage of the cannon or the musket itself. So you start to see horrendous injuries. For the first time, war, the injury rate, the mortality rate goes up hugely, because what you're not looking at is any more, kind of encounters in the field. There are some set-piece battles in the Civil War, but a lot of it is about siege. And that's what's happened here. So siege basically is about an occupying army, in this case the parliamentarian forces, surrounding a city. And as long as, you basically can be organised, a siege you're pretty much guaranteed to win over time, because what you're doing really is starving a town. This is quite nice. I saw this earlier. I've never seen this before. Have anybody heard of Constance Penwick Smith? She apparently revived Mothering Sunday, which is rather nice. Yeah, very parallels, absolutely. And of course, in the same way, it was brother against brother, relative against relative. So you had these families torn. And so much of it was down to where you lived and where your lord of the manor, where his kind of loyalties would have lain. You didn't have a choice which side you lined up on in the English Civil War. So again, for many, it kind of divided families, divided communities. And so if you were sort of laying siege, eventually people run out of food, don't they? Run out of water. If you dam up the rivers, they can't mill the grain to make bread. So you've got huge advantages of being the occupying army. As long as you've got patience and you can see it through, then basically you're going to win. And Newark was under siege on 3 separate occasions. So it was a great deal of kind of privation and suffering. But this was, no problem, Linda. We are probably another sort of 15 minutes to the end. So I apologise if I've run long, but I think it's been worth it. But again, just lovely Georgian architecture. I hope you agree this is a lovely sort of spot and a great time to be here. It's so quiet as well. So we're coming into the marketplace, which of course is the kind of commercial centre of any kind of market town. And there's a building in front of us that belongs to the kind of White Hart pub, which is a wonderful, kind of colourful medieval building just over here. So let me just bring us a little bit closer. You can see so some lovely buildings. Again, you don't give one away. Thank you very much. It's most kind of you. So this is the White Hart pub. It was extensively renovated, this medieval timbering, in the 1980s, but only really kind of taking it back to what it was. So I'm going to bring you sort of close up. You really get a sense here of quite how wonderful. And this was a billet, so quite a lot of soldiers would have been based here. Must be a reason for the Marine street sign is done. I'm sure there is. It's obviously a town insignia, David. I don't know what that reason would be, but isn't this absolutely lovely? So it's the old White Hart Inn. It's the oldest surviving inn in Newark. And if we go through the archway, you can actually see the pub itself. But I think this timbering here, it really is quite something, isn't it? We go through the gateway, so you get... And again, for those that aren't used to seeing, medieval English and early modern England settings, I know this is a kind of real treat for you. So I do kind of dwell on these kind of details of location. So again, we're not film people having a pint, that's not fair, but that's the actual sort of main body pub coaching. And absolutely, Alison's got it right. And a big giveaway to that, of course, is the kind of high archway. So you'll be able to get into, sadly missed some good shots. Oh, sorry, Lorraine. Tell you what, maybe we'll stick it up on Facebook. If people are having a problem, should we make this a freebie and put this tour up on, maybe we'll do it as a community watch party, and people can watch it and kind of see it that way. Maybe that would be a good way. So you can see the church there towering over. So let's have a look. So let me just bring it up and see. But isn't it beautiful? Look at that. The medieval woodwork on it. So colourful, so wonderful. So, was it David saying about the colour? I mean, obviously that's within this wooden structure as well. So again, whether that is because of the town insignia or because the town insignia is informed by the original coloration of this, I don't know. I'll try and find out. The coaching in because new card. Sorry, Alison, I don't know what that means, but as ever, I'm sure it is a very, very knowledgeable comment. So let's just move on. So we are, as I say, in the market, and the market has been running here certainly since the medieval period. There's a market charter in the 13th century because you need a charter. Newark was a major stop on the Great North Road. So Newark is an intersection of the Great North Road. The A1 route is also the Fosse Way, the Roman road, and of course it's on the River Trent. So in effect you've got three cracks of the whip, as you might say, in terms of its location. So we better walk on because we're getting up towards sort of dusk, and what I don't want to do is for us to miss getting into the castle. That would be a shame. So constantly, I'm not going to dwell. We're just going to pass very briefly. And my favourite York-based architect, John Carr, the 18th century, was commissioned to build the town hall here. So just getting a glimpse of the wonderful Georgian town hall. So of course, he designed many buildings in York, in Newcastle as well. He's one of the great Georgian architects. So I say I don't want to miss the castle, so we're going to push on. We're on kind of Stodman Street here, and I want to get us up to the castle before the gates get closed. So we're not far from Lincoln. No, about what would it be 20 miles or so from Lincoln, I would think. So as I say, we've got a lovely Georgian building there. But let's push on. We've got the governor's house here. The governor's house is where the governors of Lincoln, the men that were in charge of Lincoln during the English Civil War, were housed here. Amazing craftsmanship, absolutely. Fatima. And this is where Prince Rupert, the nephew of King Charles I, spent his last night in England. He was banished for failing on the battlefield. Rather unfortunate, really. He didn't really deserve to be thrown out, but King Charles was in Rupert of the Rhine, absolutely Prince. So Prince Rupert was the nephew of King Charles I. So basically, once these battle lines had been drawn, Charles had to leave himself, recluse himself, isn't he, from London. It's a very hostile environment. So he headed up first to the Midlands, then to York, then to Oxford. He raised the flag, the Royal Standard, which sort of started the Civil War in August of 1642, in Nottingham, which is about 20 miles away from here. And Newark became this incredibly important centre. And shortly after the war started, he called on Rupert of the Rhine, who was only 23 and was known as a kind of dashing cavalier. But actually what he was a brilliant technician. tactician, and his age belies experience. He had a lot of war experience in the Low Countries, and so consequently he was invaluable to King Charles. And the early years of the English Civil War went very, very well. But unfortunately, Charles I had a habit of not really listening to Prince Rupert, and every time they attained some kind of advantage, it was squandered. This is the Prince Rupert pub here on our left-hand side. I'm just getting a bit of a wiggle on now, because I'm just trying to get us into the grounds of the castle before the light goes such a degree that they're going to lock it up, which would be a shame, because it's dusk. It shuts down, and with the light, as you can probably see, is starting to go. We've got the Corn Exchange from 1842 in front of us here. It's a place of doing business. And you see the little second chimney there? If I just go in behind it, there was a stage in here. It's like a little performance, a little musical theatre. And you might have heard the expression limelight, to be in the limelight. It's how they used to do stage lighting, burnt very, very brightly. But it was toxic, and so you needed a chimney inside your theatre, so people started choking. So consequently, that's what that was. It was a chimney. So people would do their business here in the Corn Exchange during the daytime, and then afterwards, they'd sit down with a drink, something to eat, and they would enjoy a programme of entertainment evening. Thank you. Yeah, I get that, Mark. As with all these things, what you're trying to look at is a balance of time and cost and earnings. That it probably wouldn't be financially viable to do it that way. But I get what you're saying. But we're nearly done now. We're coming towards the end. But yes, there is, of course, what I could do is make this, a full 90-minute tour from the outset rather than what now run 75 minutes. I think that'd be a better way to do it. So yeah, it's just being realistic, and I'm not sort of saying please tip it isn't that. It's merely, I'll factor in a certain amount of return. Every trip you divide that by makes it more and more expensive or less yearly. But anyway, we've made it to the gardens. They have to chuck us out. And so here we are. We're just near where we started. So you can see, make it longer. I think we'll do that. I think we'll just add an extra sort of half an hour onto it. But let me now just show you the wonderful sort of curtain screen of the castle from the inside. So for Linda's birthday. Thank you, Darren. Isn't this beautiful? So at the outbreak, basically, of the English Civil War, Newark was in a very, very good position. It was the gateway to the north, and the north was staunchly loyal to the king. So think about it. York, Scarborough, all these castles we've been to, they were all part, Knaresborough, of the royalists' infrastructure, weren't they? So the royals were staunchly supported in the north. And Newark was the gateway to the north. So this was the beginnings, if you like, of the royal power base. Isn't it magnificent? And so, of course, as a result of that, it was targeted by the parliamentary forces, who laid siege to this the first time in 1643. And I can't get as close to it as I would like, because there is some work going on, but let me at least bring you the interpretation. So you can see here a kind of cutaway. Oh, I'm glad you're enjoying it for your birthday. You can see a cutaway here of, so I'll just take you back up there. So we've got the external walls, and so often we fixate on the stone part of castles, but of course inside that, what you've also got is a series of wooden buildings, which are of course protected. Hi, Margaret. So you can see here in the picture, we've got the wall, which is still obviously evident at the rear, but then obviously timber structures on the inside, which of course are a lot more cosy and warm and comfortable, luxurious. So you can see here, sort of great halls. We've got dining halls over on this side. So it enables you to begin to obviously understand, thank you, David, that castles, what we see as the stone bit, is the external, it's the perimeter, it's the kind of protective shell. But then thereafter, what we've got is, much more like a sort of common town, as you might say. And this gateway over here, or take us over here while the light is still kind of strong enough, is the oldest part. So this is Norman, this archway, this circular archway. And what we can see when we kind of get up close is that it is still blackened, that there is kind of dirt, if you like, over the brickwork. I'll show you this. It's obviously in construction at the moment. But this is from gunpowder. Thank you, Len. Can you see, if I just come in a bit closer around the archway here, can you see all this dirt here, this blackness? So this is gunpowder powdering from what's called the robinette, which was an early form of cannon. But if I just bring you up to have a look, sort of zoom on there, you can kind of see quite how thick the walls are. No problem, Rob. You can sort of see quite how solid the construction is here. So despite the fact this was peppered with shot, it stood up very, very well. Because at this time, in the 17th century, we didn't have the ordnance like we've got now. So once you could hammer cannon at it, it wasn't like sort of great howitzers of kind of, 110 millimetres, the sort of things we use today. These are much, much smaller ordnance. So when you've got the walls that are kind of a metre thick, and you can see there inside the window, they can take a hell of a lot of bombarding. Of course there's going to be damage there. Of course there's going to be bits to sort of patch up and repair. But nonetheless, you're talking about incredibly solid structures. But over time, of course, and that's what you've got as a sieging army, you've got time. So as long as you're not running out of ammunition, again, look how many course of brickwork you've got there in the repair work. Can you see? With the stone in the window, was that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 lengths of stone. That's how deep your windows are. So it gives you a sense of how strong and how solid this place absolutely was. And so believe it or not, thank you, Linda, well, I'm sure you would believe it, it never actually fell. When it finally fell in 1646, it was the instruction of the king. And the mayor wasn't at all keen to do this. The king had surrendered. He was on the run to King Charles I. He'd been taken by Scottish forces as Covenanters. And he was their prisoner. Voluntarily, he'd become their prisoner. And so the people of Newark were told they had to hand over the castle. They said, well, no, we're not going to do that until we've heard from the king. The king, by this stage, as I say, was the prisoner, so it's very likely his captors, in effect, wrote the letter. But he wrote to them saying, in effect, really kind of sorry for... Look at that light coming through the castle. Really kind of sorry for the way that this has kind of panned out, but I want you to give in. But the mayor of the town refused. And so this is where that motto comes from, about going forward and putting your faith in God. They quite literally held out to the very, very last. But actually what did for the town of Newark wasn't the ammunition. It wasn't the starvation. It wasn't even the greater numbers of the parliamentarian troops. It was the plague. Critically for the people of Newark, plague had entered the castle, into the fortifications, and so consequently it began to spread its deadly harvest. And so it got to a stage where it was impossible for the living to survive alongside the dead. And so that's what really hastened the surrender of this castle. And despite the fact that it wasn't an especially bad settlement, this, by the way, is the first public library, the Gilstrap Library. So Linda and those teachers, educators, please see the first public library there in the 1870s. The people were told, the townspeople of Newark, to take down the castle. And so whilst this looks like it's been damaged in a military siege, it's a result of military intervention. Thank you, Jen. In actual fact, this is a result of the townspeople. Look at this light we're getting now. Isn't this stupendous? What we've got here is the result of taking down. So those who remember, we've been to Knaresborough, we've heard this story. We've been to Scarborough, we've heard this story of the parliamentarians forcing royalist strongholds to take down royalist castles so they can't be reoccupied, they can't be taken again and used against parliamentary forces. And that's what happens here. So that's what we're looking at here. This light is perfect, absolutely right. Look at the silhouette there of the bandstand. Isn't that magnificent? Worth the wait, I hope. I'm so delighted to bring you a new location here on Heygo of Newark in Nottinghamshire, a place, as I say, that barely registers in the tourist guides of the UK, but is a place that is so rooted in our history, a place where King John died, and we saw history change. The beginnings of the democracy, the idea of democracy that we give to the world starts with the demise of King John. And the idea of parliamentary democracy that comes with the fall of King Charles I happens here in Newark. It is a place rooted in our nation's story. And it's a place that I think you can't fail to be kind of wowed by. We did order the sunset in specially for you. I hope you like the one we got. We ordered the deluxe model of castles and purple skies. This is Linda's birthday present. is to add them to. So it seems to me strange that Newark doesn't have any such reputation as a place to come and visit. I shouldn't be saying this. You visit York and be slapping my legs if they knew how I extol about other places. I'd get told off. But this is a place we should visit, where children should come and see and quietly drink deep in England's history, to feel the stones of a place where history, where the world changed, where the direction and the path of the human story diverged from one course to another. And Newark is one of those places. So I make no apology. Look at that sky now, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, Laura, it's my Irish roots. Look at that. Look at that. Wow. Let me just try and get some castle and some sky. Oh, that's just not behaving. No, it's too high. Let's try it this side. If that is not a sky, look at that. I was going to say sorry about the crisscross, but actually, in some sense, it sort of adds to it. Ah, that sort of works. As if you're just trying to get in a shot that incorporates both the castle and that sky. Natalie, it's not a moat, it's actually the River Trent. So this is a castle on the side of the River Trent, perfectly located. Sadly, of course, it's got some maintenance materials, but you can just see here how this spot, we started the tour just on the other side there, talking about the cooking stool. Remember, the dunking stool for scolds. And we finish on the other side of the castle with this stunning red sky. So better bring us back round so we can get out before I get locked in. Otherwise, I'll be in here overnight. So I do hope you've enjoyed your trip to the Trent. And of course, the coda to this story was a cold morning in May of 1649, where King Charles I was led to the scaffold. I believe Natalie took you on a tour of a reenactment the other day. Bizarrely, do you know, the most unusual reenactment I've ever heard of is apparently they have a reenactment of King John's death here. What is that? He died of dysentery. So quite what that involves, I don't know. I don't even want to know the details of that, but apparently there's a reenactment of it. But anyway. But I think Natalie took you on a reenactment of King Charles's final journey to his place of execution in London very, very recently. And that happened in May of 1649, where the monarch of England was treated as a common criminal and paid the ultimate price for tyranny. It's what, of course, built up the narrative, the idea of the American form of governance was protection against tyranny. The separation of powers between the legislature, the executive, the judiciary. It was very much based on the bitter experience of Charles. Was Charles a bad king? It's hard to say, really. It's hard to judge him by contemporary standards. He certainly ruled as an early modern ruler would. He saw himself as inviolate, as accountable to God, not accountable to man and not accountable to man-made structures. So, in many respects, he was true to himself. He believed in the hand he'd been given. He was a divine ruler, appointed and accountable to God, that his trial would be there on Judgment Day, not in front of the English Parliament. And he died unwilling to give any acknowledgement whatsoever he'd done anything wrong. Natalie's family fled England because they supported Charles I. And of course, many families continue to do so. Let's take us back down through the bandstand. You can see now the light is very much dripping. I'm going to give us one last shot. What beautiful blue light for his finish. Of course, the Victorian bandstand here in the midst of the park. It really is a charming place. I'm so pleased we finally got to Newark. I've really, really enjoyed bringing you here. I think, from the reaction I've had, people have been delighted and surprised of quite how lovely this place is. I've only scraped the surface today, but what a place. As ever, with Heygo, the delight is in the surprise. It's in the new. We know that. Of course, it's easy to take you to the same places over and over. It's cheap and it's proven, but the currency is new. taking you to places that you've not seen, sharing stories that you haven't heard, and feeling those connections with things that happened in the past, in a place far, far away, but they're still reverberating into the modern day. They're still impacting our ideas of democracy, of freedom, of fairness, of tyranny, of tradition, of history. But above all, stories. Because that is ultimately what we're about. We are storytellers. And make no forgiveness for that. And there's a rich tradition of storytelling in human history. It's as old as humanity itself. As long as there's been people have sat there around fires on a night and listened to stories. And they've rewarded the storytellers. So thank you for your support. It means a great deal. It certainly pays for my petrol on the way home, a bite to eat, and it keeps Humphrey in his meds and his snacks. So thank you so much, everybody who supported.